Welcome to the Kenyatta Movement podcast. And today we are undertaking a massive mission. We're doing a complete deep dive into some really incredible source material to unpack the life of a man who, lived a total political paradox.
Yeah, a really phenomenal figure, Ramogi Achieng Oneko. And we have a really robust stack of sources for this deep dive today. We're looking at verbatim UK parliamentary Hansard records from 1958, academic journals like revolutionary papers, and extensive media histories from Makleki, Nyongeza Sande, and Pakwa.
Right, plus some historical encyclopedias. Because Oneko is, he's sort of a forgotten hero of Kenya's independence. I mean, he was a pioneer of indigenous journalism. But for you listening, understanding Oneko's story isn't just like a history lesson.
Exactly.
It's really about understanding the price of true integrity and, how ordinary citizens can use information to break monopolies of power.
It shatters that neat fairy tale version of history we usually get, where the oppressed overthrow the oppressor and then everybody just lives happily ever after.
Yeah, history is so much messier than that. And loyalty in politics is even messier. So let's unpack this. Because to understand the man who would eventually, stand trial against the British Empire, we really have to look at the world that shaped him.
Absolutely. So he's born in 1920 in Tienga village down in Bondo.
Right off the shores of Lake Victoria.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to put yourself in that 1920s context. The British East Africa Protectorate had just officially become the Kenya colony. The colonial administration is, cementing its grip.
Really formalizing the racial hierarchy.
Exactly. Africans are being systematically pushed into this wage labor economy, mostly to serve the expanding European settler class. That's the water he's swimming in.
But he gets access to something that totally alters his trajectory, right? Elite education. He goes to the Masino Mission School.
Which is such a pivotal place. I mean, mission schools were these inherently contradictory spaces back then. Well, on one hand, they were designed to produce, compliant African clerks for the colonial government, to be a good, civilized subject. But on the other hand, you're teaching these brilliant young minds how to read, how to debate.
You're exposing them to global history.
Right. You're inadvertently handing them the intellectual tools to dismantle the exact system you're trying to maintain.
And at Maseno, Oneko doesn't just read about history. He literally meets it. He crosses paths with a schoolmaster who is already thinking about liberation.
Ramogi Achieng Oneko.
Yeah. And that relationship is the bedrock of so much of Kenya's mid-century history. I was reading that Oneko is just like this star athlete, a respected prefect. They actually called him Nyakek.
Which means antelope in Dolowo.
Right, because of how gracefully he moved.
And that detail about his gracefulness is, it's actually incredibly important. When you think about the psychological warfare of colonialism, the system relied on making Africans feel physically and intellectually inferior.
Oh, I see.
So to carry yourself with the grace and confidence of an antelope, to just excel and be admired, that's a subtle form of resistance. He was rejecting subservience before he ever got into formal politics.
That makes total sense. So he graduates, and he steps into the workforce, and he gets a job as a weather reporter at the meteorological department.
Which, on paper, was a highly technical, respectable position for an African man at that time.
But he hated it. He absolutely couldn't stand working under British superiors.
Because it's the ceiling of the colonial bureaucracy. No matter how smart he was, the system dictated he could never be the boss.
Right. He's gathering weather data so white settler farmers can grow cash crops, but he's entirely excluded from the wealth those crops generate.
Exactly. And that realization radicalized him. It pushed him out of the civil service and into Nairobi in the 1940s.
Where he just explodes onto the scene. By 1949, he's one of the first Africans to hold a municipal council seat in Nairobi. But he realizes pretty quickly that a city council seat doesn't mean much if your people are economically dependent on the oppressor.
You cannot stage a successful rebellion if you have to ask your oppressor for your daily bread. Economic self-sufficiency is the prerequisite for political self-determination.
Which brings us to Alutako, the Luo Thrift and Trading Corporation. He co-founded this with Ojinga Odinga in 1945. And this wasn't just a quaint community business, was it?
Not at all. They were building an economic weapon. Look at the colonial economy then. The British had a near monopoly on large-scale agriculture and commerce. Commercial centers were dominated by non-Africans.
So when Alachiko opens Masino stores, they're actively disrupting that monopoly.
Yes, they're keeping capital within the community. But the most vital thing they built were the posho mills.
The maize mills.
Right. Posho is the staple food. If you control the milling of maize, you control the food supply. By setting up these local mills, African farmers could bypass the colonial agricultural boards entirely.
They could mill their own grain and keep the profits. It's brilliant.
It was severing the cord of economic dependency.
But economic power isn't enough on its own, right? I mean, if the British control the radio stations and the newspapers, they still control the narrative. So Oneko decides to build his own megaphone.
In 1947, he takes a massive leap of faith into mass communication.
He founds Ramogi Press. And the financial details of this are just staggering. He goes to GL Vidyarthi, a prominent printer in Nairobi, and manages to buy his own flatbed printing press.
Do you know how much it cost in today's money?
Yeah, I have the conversion right here.
Yeah.
It was the equivalent of $273.21.
It sounds like nothing to us today, but in 1947, for a young African man, banks weren't giving out business loans to guys like Oneko to start printing presses.
Scraping together that kind of capital required insane community trust and the physical labor of a flatbed press back then. Manual typesetting, sourcing huge reams of paper, distributing it to rural areas. It's an industrial undertaking.
And he didn't just use it for his own community. That's the genius of it.
Right. He edits the flagship paper, Ramogi, in Dolo. But he turns Ramogi Press into this multi-ethnic powerhouse. They print Odinga's Nyanza Times. They print Mumin Yareri, a Kikuyu weekly. Radio Posta in Africa in Swahili.
He's directly countering the British divide and rule strategy. The British wanted to keep the Luo, Kikuyu, and Kamba isolated from each other. By printing all these different indigenous languages on the same press, Oneko is fostering a pan-Kenyan political consciousness.
But wait, here's the most ironic detail I found in the sources. Who is actually paying for the ad space in these anti-colonial papers?
The European and Asian business establishment.
Yes. The very people whose monopoly he's trying to dismantle are bankrolling his operation. They realized Ramogi had massive reach, so they flocked to buy ads. By the third issue, half the paper is just colonial business advertisement.
The capitalist drive for a new consumer market completely outweighed their political foresight. It's a phenomenal contradiction.
But looking at those early issues, I have to say, if I were a British censor, I wouldn't have been terrified. They're not printing Marxist manifestos. They're giving civic etiquette advice. Like, don't drink too much, keep your homestead clean, don't bathe in public.
It seems innocuous.
How does a paper that just gives civic etiquette advice become a threat to the British Empire?
Because in the context of colonial subjugation, civic etiquette is highly subversive. The British justified their rule with the civilizing mission. The narrative was that Africans were primitive and incapable of basic decorum.
So when a paper written by Africans dictates its own terms of respectability.
It's a direct challenge to that narrative. When Ramogi says, keep your homestead clean, it's telling its readers, we are a dignified, organized people. You cannot mobilize a population that views itself as inferior.
So building civic pride naturally evolves into political mobilization.
Exactly. You organize a community to be sober and organized, and a year later, that same structure is mobilizing voters for a political party.
And that party is the Kenya African Union, or KAU. Ramogi Press basically becomes the communications wing for KAU in Nyanza. Oneko is so effective that by 1951, he's the Secretary General of KAU.
He's at the center of the national struggle, and they are pushing hard against the most explosive issue in the colony, which is land alienation.
Yeah, in 1951, KAU sends a delegation all the way to Paris, to the League of Nations, and Oneko is on it. He's demanding the return of stolen ancestral lands on a global stage.
This is a massive escalation. He's bypassing the governor and taking the grievances directly to the international community.
And once you start demanding land back, the empire strikes back. The British aren't just going to pack their bags. This leads right into the boiling point of 1952.
The economic stakes were just too high. Understand 1952, look at events like the crisis at Olenguruan in 1944.
This was devastating. The colonial government expelled roughly 11,000 African squatters.
And we should clarify squatters. These weren't people who wandered onto empty land. These were indigenous people whose ancestral lands were reclassified as white highlands.
Right. They were only allowed to stay if they provided cheap labor.
But when European farming mechanized in the 40s, they didn't need as much labor, so they violently evicted tens of thousands of people into these overcrowded, degraded native reserves.
The desperation created a pressure cooker, and that pressure cooker birthed the Mau Mau. The Mau Mau movement was this militant response to the failure of constitutional politics, right?
Yes. While men like Oneko were using newspapers, the dispossessed peasants decided only violent resistance could reclaim the land. They started administering secret oaths for a guerrilla war.
So by 1952, Governor Evelyn Baring arrives. In October, Senior Chief Waruhiu is assassinated.
A staunch colonial loyalist killed in broad daylight by Mau Mau gunmen.
It proved that Mau Mau could strike anyone. So Governor Baring completely panics. He signs emergency orders. Which brings us to the night of October 20th, 1952, Operation Jockscut.
The logistics were mind-boggling. They flew in a British infantry battalion, the Lancashire Fusiliers. They threw a military cordon around the African locations of Nairobi.
Heavily patrolled. Baring had secretly signed 183 arrest warrants. They sweep up the entire KIU leadership, trade unionists, and suspected Mau Mau leaders.
It was a decapitation strike.
And Oneko is violently dragged from his home. He's arrested alongside Jomo Kenyatta, Paul Ng'i, Bildad Kajia, Kungu Kurumba, and Fred Kubai. The Kapenguria Six.
The colonial strategy here was deeply flawed, though. They wanted to crush the rebellion, regardless of whether constitutional politicians like Oneko were actually orchestrating the violent fighters in the forest.
Wait, they couldn't distinguish between the two.
Or they didn't want to. They assumed all African political activity was subversive. Their goal wasn't just to stop violence. It was to silence the African political voice entirely. They wanted to destroy the people who controlled the printing presses.
They wanted a monopoly on the narrative. And honestly, the desire of the powerful to silence truth-tellers hasn't disappeared today. It just looks different, which is exactly why we want to invite you, the listener, to join the Kenya Wantam Notam movement, KWM, at www.wantamnotam.com. I really want you to visit the site and create your account today.
It's so vital because back then, Oneko used a physical printing press to break the monopoly. Today, we need a digital platform to do the same thing.
Exactly. Also, go to our YouTube page and download the ebooks, including the Forgotten Heroes series. And let's connect on Facebook for more discussions at https://www.facebook.com/Kenyamgiatuka You can buy the full ebook there. Because remember, many Kenyans think change begins in Nairobi. Wrong. It begins where you live. When citizens share what happens in Turkana, Makueni, Kisumu, or Nyeri, patterns appear.
You start to see the same tricks.
Exactly. The same tricks, the same hands. That's how accountability begins, not with titles, but with ordinary people refusing to be fooled twice. We want your stories, what is happening or what's not. Who is doing something right? Who keeps promising and vanishing? Tell it as it is. No filters. No spin. Your words can wake up the next person to act. That is how a movement grows, one honest post at a time.
And that kind of honesty is exactly what the colonial system was terrified of, which is why they staged the Kapenguria trial.
Yeah, let's talk about this sham trial. It took place in late 1952, and they didn't hold it in Nairobi where the press could watch.
No, they flew the defendants to Kapenguria, a remote, desolate outpost in the Rift Valley. They wanted to prevent rescues, sure, but mostly they wanted to isolate the defendants from their legal counsel. You needed a special pass just to enter the district.
So they're isolated. The prosecutor, Anthony Summerhoff, claims they managed the Mau Mau to murder white settlers. But the defense team is incredible.
An international multiracial dream team, led by Dennis Noel Pritt, a brilliant British QC.
And he's backed up by Chaman Lal, H.O. Davies, Fitz D'Souza, and Akram Kapila. But because of Kenya's segregation laws, they couldn't even stay in the same hotel.
It's absurd. They were prohibited from sharing a hotel or a dining room to discuss strategy. Pritt had to rent an abandoned schoolhouse just so they could legally work together in the same room.
That's the structural racism they were fighting. But the real corruption was on the judge's bench, Judge Ransley Thacker.
Thacker was entirely in Governor Baring's pocket. Baring literally bought the judge.
He secretly paid him an unusually large pension from the emergency fund, right? Off the books.
Exactly, to guarantee a conviction because they knew the case was weak. And then they brought in their star witness, Rawson Macharia.
Oh, this guy. He gets on the stand and gives this lurid Gothic horror testimony. He claims Kenyatta gave him a naked, blood-drinking oath.
It was calculated perjury, designed to horrify the British public and discredit the independence movement.
But it was a complete fabrication. He was bribed.
Heavily bribed. Macharia was given an Exeter University course, a government job, and full police protection to lie. Other witnesses got prime coastal land.
The state mobilized its resources to purchase a guilty verdict. And they got it. All 6 sentenced to 7 years hard labor.
But here is the massive twist in Oneko's story.
Right. In 1954, he actually wins his appeal.
He's the only one of the Kapenguria Six to successfully overturn the conviction.
And the defense argument was so simple. The prosecution said he managed Mau Mau meetings, but the defense proved that all Mau Mau meetings and oaths were conducted entirely in Kikuyu.
And Oneko was Luo. He didn't speak Kikuyu.
This is like being on trial for a conspiracy planned entirely in a language you don't speak, where the judge is secretly on the prosecutor's payroll.
It laid bare the fundamental lie of Operation Jock Scott. They arrested him because he was a political organizer, not a terrorist. The Supreme Court had to acquit him.
But wait, if he won the appeal in 1954, you got to go home, right?
No. Winning in a colonial court did not mean winning your freedom.
What happened?
The moment he walked out of the courtroom, acquitted, the colonial police were waiting on the steps. They immediately rearrested him.
On what charges?
No charges. Governor Bering just invoked emergency regulations. He signed a detention order claiming Oneko was a threat to public order. He could hold anyone indefinitely without trial. The acquittal meant nothing.
That leads into the absolute darkest chapter of his life. From 1954 to 1961, he is held in the colonial detention pipeline. He is separated from the others who are serving their hard labor.
He's sent to Manyani prison and then to Takwa camp on Manda Island.
Which is essentially Kenya's Alcatraz. Scorching heat, mosquitoes, disease.
Designed specifically to break the psychological spirit of the so-called hardcore political prisoners. Malnutrition, forced labor, constant abuse.
But the outside world hadn't entirely forgotten him. I found these UK parliamentary Hansard records from April 29, 1958. British MPs are debating Oneko's detention in the House of Commons.
John Stonehouse, Dinglefoot, and Fenner Brockway fiercely debated the colonial secretary, Alan Lennox Boyd. Dinglefoot had actually visited Manda Island and interviewed Oneko.
And Foote reveals the actual grounds written on the detention order. It wasn't terrorism. It wasn't Mau Mau. It literally just said he made inflammatory speeches.
Which is the most vague, subjective accusation possible. The colonial government couldn't even provide dates or transcripts of these speeches.
It's a blank check to lock him up. And then MP John Stonehouse absolutely shreds the advisory committee defense. The colonial secretary kept saying, oh, they can appeal to this committee.
It was a total sham. Out of 10,000 detainees, they received 2,569 appeals. And over 10 months, do you know how many people were released directly because of the committee's advice?
Zero.
Zero. It was a rubber stamp for the governor.
And the psychological warfare they used on him in the camp, they called it rehabilitation, right?
Yes. The British screening officers would come to his cell. They told him the only way to be released was to confess to Mau Mau activities, denounce the movement, and swear loyalty to the British.
But he was never in the Mau Mau. We proved that in court.
Exactly. So he faced an impossible dilemma, confess to a massive lie to go home to his family, or maintain his truth and rot in a maximum security camp.
You can only prove you're reformed by lying. But if you tell the truth, you're deemed unrehabilitated. It's a real-life catch-22.
But Oneko chased the truth. He never sold out. His resilience finally paid off when he was released in 1961 as the colonial system was crumbling.
Just in time for Kenya's independence. So in 1963, Oneko wins the Nakuru town seat. And his old friend, Jomo Kenyatta, makes him the very first Minister for Information, Broadcasting, and Tourism.
Poetic justice, right? The guy who started Ramogi Press is now running the national broadcaster.
But the greatest heartbreak was yet to come. Because by 1966, there is a massive ideological rift in the new government.
We have to look at the mechanics of state building impartially here. The common enemy, the British, was gone. Now the question was resource and land allocation. KAU, led by Kenyatta, favored a status quo capitalist approach, encouraging foreign investment, respecting private property rights, even if large farms remained with elites.
And on the other side,
the socialist faction led by Ojinga Odinga, Oneko's old mentor, they believed the government was betraying the independence struggle. They wanted land ceilings, nationalization. They wanted the land returned to the poor squatters who fought for it.
So Oneko aligns with Odinga. They quit the government in 1966 and formed the Socialist Kenya People's Union, the KPU. Oneko gives up his powerful cabinet position for his principles.
And the state's retaliation against the KPU is terrifying because Kenyatta essentially uses the exact same colonial tactics the British used. They changed the constitution to force by-elections.
The little general election.
Yeah.
And the KPU still manages to win 9 seats.
But the state doesn't stop there. They use the Voice of Kenya, the ministry Oneko literally just established, to impose a total news blackout on the KPU.
Wow.
Employers are pressured to fire KPU supporters. Over 35 civil servants are fired, passports are seized.
It's the colonial playbook.
Yeah.
And it culminates in 1969 with the Kisumu incident.
A tragic climax. Kenyatta visits Kisumu, a KPU stronghold. The crowd is hostile. They chant KPU slogans. The Presidential Guard opens fire on unarmed civilians. Dozens killed.
And Kenyatta uses this to completely ban the KPU. He makes Kenya a de facto one-party state, and he orders the arrest of the KPU leadership.
Including Ramogi Achieng Oneko.
He survived the British Gulag only to be thrown into a Kenyan one by his best friend. Does this show that power itself is the problem, regardless of who wields it?
It highlights the bitter irony. The oppressive legal architecture of the colonial state emergency powers, detention without trial, was never dismantled. The new African government just took over the management, and when they felt threatened, they reached for those same suppressive tools.
They locked him up until 1975. 6 more years of his life stolen.
But his spirit remained unbroken.
It really did. Because we fast forward to the final act. In 1992, during the first multi-party elections, Oneko returns to politics. He's in his 70s, and he serves as MP for Rarieda under Ford, Kenya.
He was vindicated by history. He served until 1997, acting as an elder statesman.
He passed away from a heart attack in 2007 at age 87, leaving a widow, Losanyango, and 11 children.
He was the last surviving member of the Kapenguria Six.
And today, his sacrifice is commemorated on Mashuja Day. It used to be Kenyatta Day, but they changed it to honor all the heroes.
The most accurate way to describe Oneko is that he was continually moral. He never sold out to the British, and he never sold out his ideological beliefs for a comfortable cabinet position under Kenyatta.
Right. From starting a local printing press, to standing trial at Kapenguria, to challenging the British Parliament from a prison cell, to standing up to his own allies. It's just an incredible arc.
It demands reflection. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If Ramogi Press were founded today, what would it look like? Would it be a decentralized app, a social media movement? And how do we protect independent voices when modern censorship isn't always a police raid, but an algorithmic shadow ban?
That is the big question. We have to be our own printing presses now. And this is why this platform is not a news site. It's a people's record. Every comment, every truth written here forms a trail that no spin doctor can erase. When you post, you're not just reacting, you're documenting Kenya as it is. History isn't written in offices anymore. It's written here by you. All the 47 counties are listed there. Identify your county and start posting, sharing your ideas that can help change your village, city, and nation. Thank you for listening to the Kenya Wantam Notam movement.